Howdy, Smite fans, it's J-Mac. Spring Masters is now over, and we have finally crowned our champion. But the road wasn't easy. After 4 more days of brutal play, our final 8 teams were narrowed down to just our one champion. Now let's take a look back and see who it was and how they got there. This week's episode, the SPL Weekly Recap. Well, day 1 of our second week brought us 4 brand new teams. The Atlantis Leviathans, Camelot Kings, Tartarus Titans, and the Oni Warriors. And of those 4 teams, the first ones to qualify onward, the Camelot Kings. Their day started off with a long-winded match against the Titans. It drew out to 44 minutes of play before the Kings were finally able to close it out. Next up, the Kings had to face off with the Leviathans. And while the Levis held early game pressure, the Kings and their macro play squeaked them out a 2-0 win over the Leviathans. The next team of those 4 to qualify was the Tartarus Titans. After their loss to the Kings, the Titans squared off with the Warriors. The match was close, burning all the way to a full 3-game set, but the Titans were able to pull out a win. To close out their day, the Titans had to take on the Leviathans. And it wasn't a particularly close set, as the Titans dismantled the Leviathans for a 2-0 to qualify onward. Well, Friday brought back 2 returning teams with the Eldritch Hounds and the Valhalla Valkyries, but 2 new teams to face off with them in the Jade Dragons and the Olympus Bolts. And amongst this group, the first one to qualify out was the Jade Dragons. Their day started off with a swift win over the SCC squad of the Eldritch Hounds, and afterwards they faced off against the Olympus Bolts. That match was close, pushing to a full 3 games, but in the end, it's the Jade Dragons who had won out and qualified to the next day of play. And our final team to qualify to the last 2 days of play was the Olympus Bolts. A strong win over the Valkyries moved the Bolts into the second round of play, but then it was their tough loss up against the Dragons, and now the Bolts were faced with one final chance to qualify. A rematch with the Valkyries didn't slow down the Bolts' momentum though, as the Bolts found a clean 2-0 over the 8th seed team. Well, day 3 brings us to our final 4 teams up to play for Smite Masters: Jade Dragons, the Olympus Bolts, Camelot Kings, and the Tartarus Titans. And our first set of the day was the Camelot Kings up against the Olympus Bolts. And it's a set in which the Kings found themselves a close but confident 2-0 over the Bolts, off the back of their Hunter in Game 1 and their Jungle Mid combo in Game number 2. Second was the Tartarus Titans and the Jade Dragons. That set wasn't particularly close, as the Tartarus Titans broke the Dragons' comps apart with ease, commanding a 2-0 victory over the number 1 seed. Our third set of the day was our first qualification set, so to speak. That was between the Tartarus Titans and the Camelot Kings. The Kings showed a strong fight up against the Titans, but unfortunately, the carries of the Titans proved too mighty a foe for the Kings to restrain. Cyclone and Paul commanded the map with SOT remaining as the silent carry throughout the set. The Tartarus Titans moved on to the finals on Sunday with a 2-0 win. Our final set of the day was for elimination. This one was between the Jade Dragons and the Olympus Bolts. Game 1, Final K's oppressive Cleanus solo wreaked havoc against the Bolts, with Pagon right behind him on his Uller. The Dragons didn't just stop with their onslaught in only Game 1. Game 2 was much the same, with the Dragons' triple Hunter comp outputting too much damage during teamfights and around the objectives. Everyone on the Dragons stepped up massive to find a solid 2-0 over the Olympus Bolts. Well, it's Championship Sunday, and we're down to our final 3 teams. And our first set of the day was yet another elimination game, this one between the Jade Dragons and the Camelot Kings. Game 1 started off close, but around the 25-minute mark, a poor fight around the Pyromancer goes horrendous for the Dragons. After having already lost 2 members during the fight, the ensuing chase after, Genetics finds a massive wall to seal off the fate of the remaining 3 Dragons, netting the Kings game number 1. Game 2, the momentum started well for the Dragons, but Captain Twig had other plans, carrying his team through the mid to late game and pushing the Kings to a 2-0, eliminating the Dragons and moving on to the finals. And now, in the grand finals of the Spring Smite Masters, it's the Camelot Kings versus the Tartarus Titans. Game 1 started with early pressure for the Titans out of the solo lane through SOT. Once they transitioned to the late game, Cyclone Spin stepped up with SOT to close out a clean Game 1. There's not really much that I can say about Game 2, except that Cyclone Spin kind of just popped off harder than anyone else during the entire tournament for the Titans, taking Game number 2. In Game 3, it was Netrioid's turn to play the Jing Wei. and he and Genetics dominated the duo lane to find themselves a convincing win, bring the set to a 2-1. But in game number 4, the Titans showed no mercy to the Kings. Variety and Twig got completely shut down throughout the early game, and all the way into the mid and late game, Layers and SOT had set the pace of the game and never let off the gas. That led to the Titans finding themselves a 3-1 victory over the Kings to become your Smite Masters champions. And there you have it. 16 teams, 8 days of play, and 36 sets of games. And now we have finally crowned our champion. It's the Tartarus Titans, who are the number 4 seed coming into this tournament, and now proving that they still have what it takes to command the SPL. We're going to take a short break for now on the SPL, and we'll return on June 10th with the kickoff of Phase 2. And until then, if you need to watch any of the matches, you can go back and watch them on the Smite VOD YouTube channel, catch up on the recaps with the SMITEPro channel, or you can watch all the sets live whenever they happen over on twitch.tv/SmiteGame. I hope to see you there for the start of Phase 2. And until then, this has been J-Mac with the SPL Weekly Recap.